Water, water, everywhere. There had never been water before, but its absence was more than made up for with its sharp, icy fingers that gripped his heart and slowed his mind. He knew he needed to swim for the surface. His lungs were already itching embers seeking relief. But where was up? What was down? All was water. Then suddenly, and quite clearly, he heard the voice. It was the same as always, but this time so close, it felt like the words were spoken directly behind him. "The hour has come, but not the man." A moment of silence, grim recognition, and then the feeling of hands in a vice grip latching onto his leg with such strength he felt as if he'd snap into pieces. The last of his air was spent on a useless cry he knew no one in the world could possibly hear. And with that, he was dragged to unknown depths and darkness. The hour has come, but not the man. Niels awoke, gasping for air, drenched with sweat and filled with lingering dread. These dreams had begun months ago, at first just a voice in the darkness, but after a few weeks the sound of rushing water could be heard as well. And now with this latest vision, water itself poured into every inch of his mind. And that voice, with every night's sleep, it seemed to grow closer and closer, always repeating the same refrain. The hour has come, but not the man. Niels had done everything he could think of to rid himself of the nighttime specter. He had visited with men of science, who proposed all sorts of theories and reasonings, but to no effect. The voice could not be explained away. He had next turned to the religious, who approached his situation with a dramatic and pious fervor, but they too exhausted all resource. The voice could not be exorcised by bell, book, or candle. It ended up being by chance that he found himself in the company of an old midwife that had set him on the path he was currently pursuing, his last hope. She had come to deliver a neighbor's baby, and upon hearing of his plight, had counseled with him to visit with the widow of the Verdolde Woods, who lived on the other side of the Mörke River. She knows of all sorts of ancient and forgotten things. She may be of help. It was with this advice in hand that Niels now found himself in a small inn, about a half a day's ride from his destination. He had stopped the night before crossing the Mörke River, not wanting to traverse the bridge until daylight. All bodies of water made him nervous lately. He thought of all of this as he looked out his window at clouds threatening rain. No, he could not wait another day. Whatever was coming for him in his dreams was too close for comfort. He splashed his face with water from the basin on his nightstand, grabbed his things, and took off for the last leg of his journey. As Niels mounted his horse, the clouds burst and let forth their anguished cries that they had been holding on to all morning. Niels pushed onward. By the time he reached the bridge at the edge of town, the storm had increased considerably. The powerful currents of the Mörke River had swollen at such a rate that they had risen far beyond their native levels. He tried to push on and cross the small bridge, but as he did so, a sudden spray of water flooded over the path and almost swept his horse out from under him. Cursing as he regained balance on his steed, he turned and abandoned his path. Just at that moment, he heard a familiar refrain that drained whatever warmth was left in his miserably soaked body. It was the same as always, but this time so close, it felt as if the words were spoken right next to his ear. The hour has come, but not the man. Niels was frozen in shock. He had never heard the voice in broad daylight before, only in his dreams. He needed to cross this river, and he needed to do it today. He rode back to town and asked if there was any way across apart from the bridge. "Well, there's nothing that wouldn't be equally flooded in this weather," the innkeeper said. "Although about 4 or 5 miles down, the river opens up into a lake. There should be a ferry there you can catch if you hurry." Niels needed no further prompting. He flew down the path, rain pelting his face like stones thrown from an angry god. The river remained on his left, and while he was outside of its reach, he always kept it in his sights. He felt as if he could see forms gliding alongside just under the water, keeping pace with him in the frothing current, although he could not be sure if this was true or simply the imaginings of his half-crazed mind. He passed the hour in this watery purgatory before he finally came upon the landing of the ferry. The innkeeper was right. It was just pulling out to leave as he dismounted and rushed for the dock. And while the gangway was now closed, the boat was close enough that Niels knew he could make it on board the vessel if he jumped quickly. He charged for the end of the dock, and just as he moved to jump, his feet gave out from under him. The wood was too slick from the storm, and now instead of finding the solid purchase of the ferry, he dove head first into the waters of the lake. Its sharp, icy fingers gripped his heart and slowed his mind. He knew he needed to swim to the surface. His lungs were already itching embers seeking relief, but where was up? What was down? All was water. Then suddenly and quite clearly he heard the voice. It was the same as always, but this time so close it felt like the words came from his own two lips. "The hour has come." Niels felt a hand grab his leg and begin to pull. And then more hands pulling him from the other way. He had feared drowning, but he was sure now he was going to be pulled limb from limb instead. The last of his air was spent on a useless cry he knew no one in the world could possibly hear. And with that he sank out of consciousness, ready for whatever had been stalking him to finally claim their prize. Niels awoke, gasping for air. Fresh air that filled his lungs. He barely even noticed the shouting voices surrounding him. "What are you, a madman? What are you doing jumping into a lake like that in a storm? Even on a clear day, this lake is a mess of weeds that can trap the strongest. You're lucky we were able to fish you out." The workers on land saw him dive into the water, and it was their hands that latched onto him and pulled him free from the lake. He looked down and indeed saw a tangle of weeds wrapped around his leg. "We need to get you home. Where are you from, stranger?" "I need to cross. I must cross the lake," Niels said dumbly. "Well, not tonight. With this storm only getting worse, that'll be the last ferry that goes out today." The men agreed to take Niels back to the inn and promised to come for him first thing tomorrow morning. That night, Niels dreamt. But it was different than anything he had dreamt before. No rushing water. No voice, no hands ready to pull him to an unknown grave. Instead, he found himself in a quiet and peaceful emptiness. Something in the distance was glistening, and as he approached, he realized it was a small, circular mirror of light. Its glow was comforting and inviting, and for the first time in months, Niels felt himself breathing easy. His eyes grew heavy, and soon they closed, and Niels walked further into dream. The next morning broke, as has always been the case, and will always be the case. The storm had passed, and the little village had begun its strivings as it prepared for the day ahead. The peace of the morning felt so sure, so embedded into the fabric of this sleepy place, that when a sharp cry rang through the air, everyone came to see what was the matter. The innkeeper was consoling his sobbing wife. The woman had gone into Niels's room to check upon the man after last night's turmoil. To her horror, she found him drowned, head first, in the small circular wash basin in his room. There were no signs of a struggle. It looked, for all intents and purposes, as if he had done the deed himself. His hour had come.